This is Unexpected with Hannah Love. In this podcast, you will gain a new perspective of how God loves you enough to call you to things that you couldn't have imagined for yourself. Well, hello everybody, and welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks,
I hate
Hannah.
that I have to ask you this, but do you go by Rebecca St. James or do you go by Rebecca Fink?
St. James.
Okay.
Yeah, publicly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what was funny is when we first started Bible study, Shay saw everyone leave the house one day and he was like, "Was that Rebecca St. James?" And I was like, "No, that was Rebecca Fink. I don't know who you're talking about."
I love that so much.
I just had to disclose that. I'm always telling people that I am forever a social liability. I don't know who people are by their face anyway, and so
I think that's a beautiful thing, and I love that story so much. It makes me so happy. And actually, when people get to know me,
You're just Beck.
that's what I like.
Yeah.
I like them getting to know Beck before Rebecca.
Anything,
at all.
Rebecca,
Yes.
anything. Okay, good to know. Well, for those of you who were like me living under a rock, Rebecca St. James is with me today. I'm honored that I get to call you a friend. You
Same.
are so dear. You are so full of wisdom. Rebecca is, first and foremost, she is a mother and a wife, but her life and her testimony is incredible. She's a singer, songwriter. How many awards you've won, I don't even know. You're an author. You have a podcast on Focus with the Family. You're an actress. There are a few things. I'll be honest with you. On the drive back today, I was looking at your bio and I was like, oh, guess it is Rebecca St. James. You have done many things, Rebecca, but I am just honored that you're here today, honored that you are going to share some of your life and your testimony with those that are listening. I'm just excited because I get to sit down and visit with a friend.
That's how I feel too.
And we already know, we've already prayed over this episode. We've already asked Holy Spirit to go before us, and we know that that's what the Lord does. So thank you so much for taking time,
My joy.
for being here. Forgive me for being out of breath, but as you know, I am days away from having...
She is very pregnant.
I'm so pregnant.
I'm thanking you right now for even doing this podcast in this moment in time.
No, I've been
days before
so
this epic
excited
time
about
in
it.
your life.
It's going to be good.
Thank you.
It's going to be good.
It's a joy.
Well, I will throw it over to you. This is what I always do. I put people on the hot seat. I'm just going to throw it to you and let you share. You can pick up wherever you want in your story.
In my life story?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll try to be quick, and then you can kind of take it where you want.
No rush here. Listen, I love the details. God is in the details.
Well, I grew up in Australia, so my accent is very mixed because I moved to the US when I was 14. But I grew up in Sydney and lived a pretty normal life, I would say, till I was 14. But yeah, great Christian family, gave my life to God at 8, gave my talents to him at 12, and then started to see him leading me into music. At 13, I did my first tour opening up for Carmen and had sung in a kind of junior rock band at my school and done some demos there, and Carmen heard that and asked me to open for him. So then I did a worship album in Australia before we moved to the US at 14. And then I feel like life just took this whole different path that was really unexpected when we moved here. And there's a movie that just came out last year about our family's life, Unsung Hero. And so that movie really documented, that moment in time, and the small group that we were in together had, we went and saw the movie together as a group, and that was really special. That
Shay and I got to go, and I'll admit,
to the premiere. You guys came to the premiere.
We did, and we
Thank
cried.
You.
And it was actually beautiful for me, who didn't know anything about you or your family or your history, to get to sit back as someone who knows you and your heart as a woman and as a mother, and get to watch your life. And it was kind of a really neat privilege. And I was like, wow, to see your life lived out on screen. Also, you had a cameo, and I was like, there she is.
Don't blink or you'll miss me.
But it was beautiful. We definitely cried. Shay cried more than me. We're a tender family, but it was it was amazing to get to see your life out there for all the world and just to know who you are behind it all. It was just such a mix of emotions, and I know it was for you too. So I'll stop interrupting and let you keep
no,
going.
You're not interrupting at all. I love the back and forth, and it was such a blessing to have so many friends and family there that night at the premiere here in Nashville, and that you guys were there sitting right in front of me and Covey. It was like so great. And Shay was like, I think the first person to lead the standing ovation that night, which was just like, we just felt really loved by our friend community. But yeah, it's very wild seeing your life play out in a film. You know, it's surreal and it's crazy and it's, you know, a real privilege. It's vulnerable. Yeah, absolutely. But it's been a super redemptive journey for me to even have that film come out and kind of revisit my story, I suppose, in a way. But what happened in what the film shows is that my family moved to the US in 91. I was 14. There was 6 kids in the family at that time. And then my mom was pregnant with my little sister. And we came really to the US because my dad was going to work here for 2 years, and that was the plan. And then we'd go back to Australia. And then a couple months after Dad, you know, began this new job here managing a Christian artist, that job went away. And so we lived by faith really for the next couple years of our lives here. And God showed us that we were meant to stay, and 30 years later, we're still here. But it was a really profound and powerful and life-changing time in my life because that job falling through for my dad was kind of the beginning of God giving me a testimony that was so profound that I still share to this day a lot in my shows. But what happened was, I mean, we really didn't have much of anything to our name and no friends or family to fall back on. And so we prayed as a family. We'd sit on the floor in our furnitureless rental house and pray for a car. We didn't have one for a while, and, you know, for food and income to just, you know, survive. And again, not knowing where meals were going to come from sometimes. And my sister, you know, my mom had a really vulnerable delivery on child number 6. And so we didn't have insurance or even a way for my sister to be born in a hospital. So we prayed about all these things and then saw the miracles happen, like saw literal answers to prayer. And, you know, a car given to us by a homeschool family out of the blue, like handing over brand new, you know, keys to a brand new van. So, and then like checks would come in the mail that would cover our rent by dollars sometimes, and groceries on the doorstep, and truckloads of furniture dropped at our house, and someone paying for my sister to be, born in that hospital. So just amazing things that I think at that very vulnerable, impressionable age of 14, 15, I'm seeing God do these amazing things. And it not only shaped my heart and my walk with Jesus, but really gave me something to say, because I was auditioning at that point for different record labels, and the movie kind of depicts that as well.
And you wrote, you began to write.
I was writing, yes, I was writing songs. At that point, I'd only written I think one song back in Australia, but I started writing a lot more at that point. But we just, I think there was some suspicion at that point from the Christian recording industry of what does a 16-year-old have to say? Mm-hmm. And that's even a line in the movie. What does the 16-year-old have to say about God or life or anything, And that wasn't said to me, but I definitely knew that people were a little bit underlying
concern.
question. Yeah. But then when we have these miracles happening and I see the power of prayer, I knew that he had given me a story, and that God, allowed our family to walk through that time for a really intentional purpose. And now, all these decades later, not only have I shared, that story for years about seeing the power of God, but then a movie comes out that kind of can instill faith in the next generation. Right. And people that kind of grew up on my music that are also now listening to my brothers in For King and Country are hearing this testimony, seeing it on a screen, and then talking to their kids about prayer and family life and pulling together in the hard times and sticking it out in family life and marriage. So it's been really beautiful to see what God's done through that. And then really very soon after that time in our life was when God started to lead me into full-time music. Wow. So it was 20 years of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, go back, because you said at 12 you gave your gift to God.
Uh-huh.
So tell me more about that, because that feels very intentional, especially for a 12-year-old.
Yeah. Well, I will say that even at 8, my mom wrote a little journal about us kids and like presented it to us at 21. And I'm trying to do that with my 3 kids now, as much as I can in our crazy life. But she wrote in my journal that even when I'd given my life to Jesus at 8, she saw this difference in me and kind of a softening and, I don't know, like just a change in my character. So I think there was a spiritual sensitivity that began probably even before 8. I mean, I think I loved God, but it became so real that Jesus died on the cross for me at 8. That's what made me want to give my life to him. So, 4 years later, I was at a Christian school, up until the end of grade 8. And so I was, what my parents were teaching me was being backed up at my Christian school, and it was wonderful. 2 different great Christian schools. And so I think there was just this idea that I want to be a world changer. I want to be a history maker. I want to live like this great adventure that God's called me to, and I want to be on mission for him. And I know what, I was reading all these different books about George Mueller, and he ran an orphanage over in England, and like Mother Teresa. Like I watched a documentary with my grandparents, about her, and she became a hero for me. Billy Graham, all these different people, and I was like, man, these just people that were used by God in ministry.
Right.
And were in kind of that sweet spot of calling and gifting and availability to God. And it just, something in me really that young. And I mean, I have nearly a nearly 11-year-old. So I'm kind of going, wow, it gives me a perspective on giving my life to mission at 12 and then doing your first tour at 13. I do see how young that was now because I have a daughter that age. But it felt very natural for me just to go, Lord, I really want to be used by you. I want to live this adventure that you have for me specifically. And every Christian.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. I actually heard someone the other day, Lisa Bevere. I was just telling you, I was
She's
listening
awesome.
to her. And and of course, this is between her and God. But it struck me that, people say that often, or they say, God, use me. And she said she was praying something along those lines, and he said something about, do you remember when an old boyfriend used you, or how do you feel about being used? And so I realized then, because I've been in abusive relationships in the past, and I thought, wow, I guess that verbiage for someone could be triggering,
yes.
And so he said, I don't use my children. And instead, it was this reminder that we get to partner with him.
Yes,
and I just loved
word.
that.
Yes.
Just in case, because for some people it might not click, or
that it's surrender,
that
and it's joy,
and it's partnership with him
good.
and what he has for you and what he's calling you to, instead of just, because for some people it might be like,
I don't want to be used.
I don't want to be used.
Right. I like that switch in terminology.
And I'm just throwing that out there for anyone that might give them a new, verbiage behind that prayer. Just like that. Something that might click in a different way, to be like, God, let me partner with you
in what you're already doing.
In what you're
already doing.
Right.
He's already moving.
Right.
And I remember a Bible study that I did called Experiencing God when I was probably 16, 17, around that age. And it was on knowing and doing the will of God. And it was all about that. I love that you brought up that word, because it's about partnering with God in what he's already doing. You're just joining him in what the Holy Spirit is already doing.
That's right.
I love that.
I love it. It's so good. Okay, well, keep going.
So then, I mean, I really launched into this whole music thing. And I think as I reflect back now, and my husband and I have just written a book about our lives, like separately and together. And it's called Lasting Ever, faith, music, family, and being found by true love. And so it's wild, because the book forced us to kind of both look at our lives. And I think part of what was kind of the challenge of doing what I did, as well as the blessing of it, was I was so young. Touring at 13 and then going full-time in music at 16 is definitely challenging. And it feels like whenever I hear people talking about, being a child actor, or like a child doing, music or any of it, I relate a little bit because there's
Right.
a tremendous amount of pressure that you
Yes.
feel to live up to this adult standard. You haven't gone to college for this. You haven't prepped for it. I think so. There's insecurity and vulnerability and a sense of not enough that I have probably lived within a lot of my life. So I'll say that's part of the challenge of it. The blessing of it, Hannah, though, is that I had to depend on Jesus.
Right.
Like I remember that, before my first show in Perth in Australia on this tour when I was 13, literally getting on my face backstage and just going, Lord, if you don't give me strength to go out there, there's no way I can do this. And so it's been that kind of dependence, I think, the whole way, and still is. Now in my 40s, it's just like, Jesus, I cannot do this without you. And I'm thankful for that, because it's like, I think that sense of weakness ends up becoming my superpower, because it's like I really know that I need him. I need the power of God, and I cannot do it without him. And it creates this intimacy with him that really was there the whole way. And I dealt with burnout towards the end of, doing music. So it wasn't all, sunshine and roses.
Right.
But I think throughout it, there was this deepening just dependence on Jesus and this clinging to him that stayed the through line.
At what point do you think that I'm not enough went away?
I don't know that it did in a way, honestly. I mean, I think it lessened in some areas. It's almost like you work a muscle, you put in your 10,000 hours, and, you kind of know that world, and I knew the road life. I kind of knew how to do the shows. And so I think there was more of a confidence that grew. But I still think that there was this sense of, Lord, I need you even to kind of survive this with my heart intact. I love the verse in the Bible that talks about guard your heart, for out of it flow the wellsprings of life. And I think I wish I had have known younger. And I think this applies to everyone listening. I think we all could do like living in that scripture really young, even in our teen years, just going, Lord, what does it look like to guard my heart? Because out of it flow the wellsprings of life. Show me what that means in the most beautiful way.
Right.
Like that you're the guardian of my heart, Lord. And so I learned a lot the hard way, I think, when it comes to like guiding my heart. But there was this dependence on him that I'm thankful for. And I'm still thankful for, because I know my need for him for everything I'm still doing now.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we say all the time on here, but the darker the night, the brighter the stars. And in the valley is where the silt is. And that's where everything grows, right?
Yep.
Like that's where it all washes on our knees and in the low places.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I will never not be thankful for the hard, because that is where that intimacy grows, I think, deepest.
Yeah. And there was a time, where I was pretty burnt out, and I was actually struggling. I talk about this in the book, about a time where I was really burnt out. And I mean, I really retired from music, when I was about a year into marriage. So I think I was 34. And I had at that point struggled with vocal issues because I was just so depleted. Yes, nearly 20 years of music, and just, I think feeling some of that increasing sense of inadequacy, or just, I mean, I put words around it now, but it was almost like I felt like this emotional anorexic in a way. Like I was still functioning and still pouring out, but I was skin and bones,
right.
And there wasn't much of me left. And so I had I would almost like lose my voice because I would struggle to breathe on stage while I'm singing, or while I'm trying to catch a breath to like sing. And so it was a really challenging, hard thing to have these certain nights where I would be feeling emotionally really taxed, and I would be struggling to breathe while singing. It was almost like a form of a panic attack. Yeah.
Did you tour every year, every single year?
I mean, we toured very, very consistently. Yeah. And I mean, it became less and less like the longer that I was singing, and I started doing a bit more book writing, and I started doing some acting when I moved to California, and I was doing some other things as well. And I'm so thankful for how much beauty there was in that time. I mean, we toured in Europe a lot, and we in Scandinavia and Australia, and got to go back to my homeland and, see God move night after night after night. There was so much good. but I think it wore me down. And I didn't know probably till it was a little bit too late, like how to guard my heart, how to guard my schedule, how to have healthy yeses, healthy nos.
Right.
This is the language
Boundaries
I use
are
now.
hard.
Yes, this is the language I use now.
Right.
Like my husband and I talk about, what are healthy yeses, healthy nos? I think every individual needs to be asking this question, especially in the day and age we live in right
That's
now,
right.
where there's so much opportunity for so much.
Overabundance
Yes.
of not only distraction, but noise and
Yep.
opportunity. The Lord laid that on my heart one time. I think I shared in Bible study, but God said, is it an opportunity or is it a distraction?
100%.
And I was like,
wow. Share that. Yeah.
Because Shay always has opportunities that come up. And I'm like, wait, you will always have these. I mean, they won't always look like this, but is this a distraction or is it an opportunity? And I was so glad that God stopped me and was like, you need to figure out. That was his way of saying, is this a healthy yes? Or is this a healthy no?
Yes.
I've struggled with boundaries my whole life. So I love hearing another woman that's like putting words to it, because I do think that as women and as the ones who are usually the caregivers or the households, the ones that are overseeing the household and kind of the emotional undercurrent of the home, that we have a hard time saying no to anyone because it feels like letting people down.
Yep. And I think too, in the age of like social media that we're in, and not that I'm not trying to paint out that it's the devil and it's all bad or whatever. I think, in kind of limited doses, there's good there
moderation.
Too. Yeah. Everything in moderation. But I think that we can also get caught in this comparison trap of, well, this family looks like they're doing all these things or giving their kids all these certain opportunities or going on these certain vacations, or they're doing this, or their life looks so perfect, and then look at mine. And we can put this pressure on ourselves to do and go, instead of kind of going, okay, Lord, how is our family called to live in this season? And different seasons look different too. And sometimes less is more. And that's what we're in this season right now, of like 3 kids under, 10 and under, our youngest being 4. And it's just like, Lord, I want to live so present to them. I want to live not overdoing it, not being distracted, like being present to these important conversations that I need to have with my preteen daughter, And so what are the things that you are calling me to, and what are the things that I can kind of let go of?
Right.
Because that's not my season.
Right. And it's almost like we have the ability to ask God for permission to let go of some things.
Yes.
And when you frame it like that, it's almost easier, I think, for a woman to be like, all right, God, can I let this go?
Yes.
And he will answer.
Yes.
I love that is something that we've cultivated in our Bible study, is hearing the voice of God, just hearing and recognizing how he speaks to each of us individually.
Yes.
Because I think that's really important. But we will go back. Okay, so around 34, you stopped.
Yes.
And I'm assuming you had your first?
Soon after that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I had 6 months of total rest, and it was wild because I was like, I felt God speak that to my heart. Like,
Rest.
I want you to have 6 months of literally not accomplishing anything in the sense of what you're used to.
I bet that was tremendously hard for you.
Well, I mean, it was really freeing. I mean, it was really like freeing to just go, you know what? If I want to binge watch Everybody Loves Raymond for, a while, I can do that. And I think I did. I think I watched every episode of that, And if I want to just go be with friends for a while or start a cooking club, I think I did that. Like I do lots of coffees with people, walk, like just be out, like sit in the sun, go to the beach. We were in California at that point. So I think it was this permission to, like, it was just no book writing, no singing, no touring, nothing. What I did find as I moved into it more was, so initially I think it was exciting. It was like release. Like I'd been longing for decades for this kind of release. And then once I moved into it, it was like, okay, I feel really weak and I feel, this kind of skeleton of a human being, and I'm in counseling and really trying to kind of work through the story of my life. am I still valuable to people not accomplishing all of these things that I'm used to accomplishing?
Well, you've performed for how many years?
Almost all my
Your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of what I knew more than what I didn't know. And so I had a counselor tell me once, Rebecca, you could sit in a room with a friend or with somebody and not say one word to them. Literally do nothing, but just your presence, the Holy Spirit in you, just who you are is enough. Who you are is a gift. Your presence is enough. And it was so freeing to go, oh, it's not about doing or saying or what I can be for people in that way or what I can kind of accomplish somewhat tangibly. It's actually who he's built me to be that is the gift. And so I really had to sit on that for quite a few years, I feel like.
I would imagine.
To really get my head around that. But I think in that 6 months, he was really helping my whole system, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, to settle down.
Yeah.
And to just receive and to be and to sit in that, I'm enough. He says I'm beloved and I'm enough not only for him, but for others. And I fell pregnant really fast, even kind of, I think I was at 35 at that point, maybe, starting to try to get pregnant. And I fell pregnant really fast. And I think it was, for me, I think my fertility at that point, in part, and I could be guessing at this, I could get to heaven and be like, no, it wasn't. I just gave you this child. It was nothing to do with that 6 months rest. But I do think I was coming into trying to have a baby and, my offering myself in that way and our family in that way, to this most wondrous of lovely things. I think I was coming into it rested. And I do think I struggled with fertility in a secondary way after that. And I think, I don't know, I think there was a connection to the rest that God called me to and flourishing in that dream right away.
I believe that. Mm-hmm.
So I'm really thankful. So yes, I fell pregnant after that. And then when our daughter, and it was just this joy, this radiant joy of, this is what I've dreamed since I was such a small child. I mean, my main dream of my life was to get married and have a family, and music was a tide me over. It was just a really long tide me over because I was 33 when I got married. But yeah, and it was about 4 years after that, 5 years after that, that God called me back into music for this kind of second round of something new and something different. And it was out of the blue because I was very at peace about not going back to music, for the rest of my life. I had been very surrendered to it. But I think this moment on stage happened during worship in Alaska where I knew something had shifted. And we were in a winter season at that point. We were miscarrying. My husband had lost a job that he didn't see himself losing, and it was kind of an unjust situation and very difficult. And he called us out of this winter into the spring. And I remember being on stage in this spring experience with Jesus. I'm crying. The audience is crying. I'm experiencing this longing, this joy in being used by him, in actually partnering with Jesus. I love it. The Holy Spirit flowing through me as his conduit, and realizing that I miss this connection that I have with the Holy Spirit when I sing and when I'm actively involved in ministry and when I'm dependent on him in that way. And I walked off stage and I said to my brother, I know that God just did this radical thing in my life, and I know he just called me back to music, and I don't even know all the layers of it, but I just know that he has just spoken this thing to my heart where it's like, I am about to do such a work in your life, such a restorative work in your life. Don't rush ahead of me. I've got this. Just wait and see what I've got for you. I literally felt like God was just going, putting his fingers together, just going with this look of joy and this radiance, and just looking at me, his child, and going, just wait and see what I have for you. And I'm walking in that now, Hannah. I'm walking in that now of what 7 years ago he said to me. And we had two more kids after that time of infertility, and spring came, both on a ministry level as well as our family flourishing. And I've just seen God do so much. And you've witnessed some of this too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just want everyone to hear that 7 years. 7 years. Because sometimes God promises us things. Sometimes we know what he has spoken to our heart, to our spirit, and then we have to hold on to it. And there's a piece of scripture. I'll have to look up where it is, but Paul was writing to Timothy. And I know this wasn't a word over you, but it was a word that God gave to your heart. And he literally says to use the words prophesied over you as a weapon against the enemy. And I think that is so powerful because especially even if God gives you a word, I think that you hold on to that like a weapon because if God gave it to you, God's a promise keeper.
Yes.
And so you wield that as your sword and as your weapon in seasons, even if it's years long, where the enemy is coming against you saying, God didn't say that.
Right.
This isn't going to happen for you.
Tempting you to fear.
All of these things, fear and doubt and shame and whatever it is that comes against you. I think it's so important to remember to hold on to
100%.
what God has promised.
To hold on to in the darkness what we knew in the light.
Yes.
And
you knew on that stage that moment.
I did. And he did. There was a lot that he did immediately. Like there was a lot that he brought to my heart, a lifting of my heart, like a change in my voice too. He was renewing that. And then I got pregnant almost immediately with our second daughter. So there was a lot that happened immediately. We moved from California to Nashville. There was a lot of change. But there was a lot too that were kind of part of the promise, but they were delayed. And, kind of a second round of, a different, maybe a lighter winter season that came after that spring. And you're right. We had to trust God in that second round of winter and just hold true to what we knew was coming, even when we didn't see the fruition of it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people right now are in that season of winter and saying, Lord, where are you? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And where are you in this, Lord? And I've sought to trust you and I've put my hope in you, but I've come up against discouragement or disappointment and so I think this is why we need to share our testimonies and our stories of God's faithfulness and his goodness. And it's part of why my husband and I wrote this book was because we wanted to tell of all the good that he's done, all that he's restored, all that he's redeemed, all these stories of his faithfulness because we encourage each other. In Revelation, there's a scripture that says we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And we need these testimonies to spur each other on to love and good deeds, to encourage each other when it's hard. And I think it's just so important, if you're listening, just and God's done some things in your life, speak up about it because we all need that.
That's right. I've done a few episodes on the blood and on the testimony, and I use that verse over and over because that is defeating the enemy. That's what defeats the enemy. And as you and I were talking earlier today, I think it's so important when God has done something for you to be able to share that at some point, because to hear another person say, God did this for me, means for them that God can do it for them too.
100%.
I just think that there's something supernatural about it, that when you have heard that God worked this miracle for some other person, for some reason, it just feels tangible and like it can happen for you too.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
God can turn all things to the good for those who love him and are called according to his purposes.
Absolutely.
So I love that. And that is why I have this podcast, is so people like you can come on and share with the world. And honestly, your whole family has done this. Like, what a legacy of vulnerability. First of all, in your parents, your siblings, to share that part of your story. It's almost like your origin story.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And now it's the second half.
Yes.
And this is your story.
It is.
This is you and Cubby's story.
Yes.
And the fact that you will get to share that not only with your kids and that they're seeing it like in real time, but that it's going to be out there for the world. And like, it's a second phase of vulnerability for you because, to be honest, you have lived with your entire life, out there for the world.
A lot of it. Yeah.
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 And so how do you grapple with maintaining some things as private and sacred, and I guess it would really just be like the Lord would have to lead you to say, it's time. It's time. I want you to share this. And did you have one of those moments? Because you know, in my heart, I'm like, there will be a day, I think, where Shay and I probably write something or do something. But I also think that God is going to have to take us to that place and say it's time.
Yeah. Well, I probably almost lived a little bit of like the reverse of that. It was almost like because I was in Christian music, everything that I feel like I was receiving from God, like being filled up in, like, you know, would then become offered.
Yes.
Like in my show, I would be
Yes.
sharing about it, or in an interview, or in a song. Like a lot of what I was learning in my life would then become a song. Because I did a lot of writing, and most of my music I feel like I've written with, you know, generally with other people, but a lot of it I wrote because I wanted it to be this authentic thing. I wanted to the receiver of the music to recognize the human story in it, to recognize this is authentic because it's coming, you know, from my story. So I would generally just, anything I was learning, it would just flow out into kind of ministry. And I feel like I hit a point probably somewhere in my later 20s, and I was probably starting to, had been feeling probably the pinch at that point for a little while. But I felt like God just started speaking this note to me of, you know, that he loved this heart of kind of maybe generosity, or like, you know, offering up what I had to minister to other people, but that there was moments that he wanted things just for me. There were these like sacred, almost jewels of intimacy between he and I that he wanted to gift to me that were just for me. Yes. And so it was almost like I've had to, honestly, Hannah, like reclaim parts of my heart or parts of my life or parts of my identity or personality or personhood and take them back in a way. Like, okay, almost become a bit more precious about.
That makes sense.
About my heart and my story. And I'm still very open book. I mean, I still feel like that I really am not trying to hide anything. Because I think there is so much power in our stories, but there's these like sacred places in my heart or my journey with God where I just feel like he's just like, yeah, that's just for us. Yeah. And there's a loveliness to that, you know, there's an intimacy to that.
It's an intimacy and a gift. I love that. And I love that, you know, like all of us, we're just trying to figure it out.
100%.
And it's kind of like the boundaries thing. We like learn as we go.
Yes. And there's grace for that. Like, I think, you know, we talk in our small group about kind of having a word for the year. And I think God's given me a few this year. I feel like there's a few. But I think one of the words that he's given me for this year is grace. And I think learning to walk in grace towards myself and receive it. And I mean, even speak it to myself out loud sometimes, Hannah. I'm like, I actually just say, there is grace for me. Yes. Like, there is grace for me. Yes. And, you know, and grace to be a learner too. Like, I love that you like brought that up, because sometimes I think we live in this world and we have access to all this information, all these podcasts, all these like tutorials on how to do this, that, and everything. You can find a tutorial on just about anything.
Or a book.
Yes,
anything.
Or a book. Yes. Resources. We have
a TED Talk,
limitless
a masterclass,
resources on everything under the sun. But there is grace for us to be learners and to, I don't know, explore it with God and to grow in him and to not feel like we have to be perfect.
Right.
Like, and I'm growing into this freedom. I feel like the older I get, the more I want to be just like a child.
Yes.
That is just like, okay, tell me more, Lord, you know, like just draw me closer.
About who you are. And honestly, last year for me, it was, I said, I want to go closer. I want to go deeper, because God gave me a picture of that. But then at some point, I was reading a book, and she said, you know, often as a church, we say that we want to know you more. Yep. But what we should be saying is, God, you can have more of us. Yes. And so it's like the emptying of ourselves, which is essentially the dying to ourselves, right? Yes. So it's the emptying of ourselves so that God can reveal more of who he is and more of how he sees us. And that's where he comes in and he transforms us by the word. Yeah. And so
that's where the freedom and the joy and the peace and the hope and all the things that we all long for, that's where it is. You know, it's found in him, and it's found in seeing ourselves how he sees us, and discovering more of who he is. And so, yeah, that's why I want to grow younger as I grow older.
I love that. I love that. It reminds me, I was watching again on, the distraction of life on the scrolling, but I was watching a video last night of these siblings. Of course, my algorithm is all babies and and like siblings meeting their new baby, and it was this kind of stitched together video clip of several different siblings that were meeting their baby for the first time, which always gets me anyway.
Oh yeah.
But what struck me was that these were like little ones. Like, for instance, maybe Abram's age, he's almost 2, that were holding a newborn baby that don't even have words. And tears were just rolling down their faces. And I just want to cry thinking about it now.
Yes. Wow.
That little ones who are literally, they're so young. They're just babies themselves. But I sent it to Shay and got him crying too. And,
sure.
And he said the same thing that I was thinking. And I was like, there's just something undeniable. But I think no matter how old we are, our children, they're so pure. There is no age limit for recognizing a miracle. And it just shows you, this 2-year-old holding a newborn baby that's weeping. They are recognizing the goodness and the beauty and the miracle of God, of life. And I just think that there's something so, I don't know, powerful in that. Just to see through the eyes of a child.
Yes. And I think our children, for those of us that are parents, they'll relate, are this invitation to play and to joy and to, I don't know, a perspective that is just really lovely, and even a perspective on how God sees us. I think, when I think about, and I've heard a lot of people say a similar thing. This is not anything new, but a lot of people say they discovered a perspective on how God sees us when they became a parent. It's like, our kids are not getting it right, a reasonable amount of the time. Right. Like, it's like they're learning the hard way things, and, there has to be consequences. But the love that we have for these children, I mean, I go in pretty much every night, especially to my littles. It's harder, but oldest has a bunk bed, so it's harder to get up to her. But I kiss their little cheek, and I'm just, like snuggling their little cheek and just saying, thank you, Lord, for these children. And I'm just so delighted. But again, these are not perfect kids. These are, earlier in the day, they might have been, they just might have had a bad attitude, or, not being completely respectful every moment, or whatever, like normal kids. But I adore them. Like, I love them. I'm their mom. And just this perspective of how, like, God sees us, and he sees through to our hearts that are, he's just got grace and compassion for us that is just huge. And I think becoming a parent has just shown me more of that, like how he sees me. Like, he's delighting in me, even in my absolute lack of perfection. That's and right. I'm learning things, and I'm growing, and I'm struggling, but he just loves me.
He just loves
I'm his.
Us. Yes. And I mean, really, having a child, I think, grows you up more than anything. And for me, it deepened my faith more than anything, because again, I was seeing, I feel like through God's eyes, how he sees us. Yes. And it's just like, we see when our children are struggling emotionally, or they don't have a grasp on this yet or this yet, but that they will, and you know who they are, and you know their character. Yes. And even though they're still working through all of this, you already know, and you love them so much, and you just want to call that out in them. Yes. And you're like, this is exactly it. Yes. This is exactly what is going on when I'm messing up, and God is up here going, we'll work through this. Yes. And sometimes I'll tell the boys even, do you know it makes God so happy when you talk to him? And I kind of say it out loud because I need the reminder.
I love that. Like, I'm going to use that.
I want them to talk to God, but also it's for me as a mom, because I'm like, I love it when my kids talk to me. Yes. I love it when they come. They're like, Mommy, can I tell you this? Yes. I want you to be grown coming and telling me things.
Yes, 100%.
And so sometimes I just say it to them. I'm like, God loves when we talk to him. And also, Mommy loves it when you talk to him.
Yes, that's
So,
really beautiful. I love
there's
that.
There's just so many lessons in it.
Yes.
Shay and I always say life really began when we have kids. When we did.
Yes. I know. It's such a beautiful gift.
It is. Well, okay, let me skip over here.
Yeah.
How about this transition that you and Cubby are in now? Because now you guys are doing a parenting podcast on Focus with the Family, right?
Yeah, Focus on the
Family.
Family.
Which I love. And I didn't even know this until I talked to you about coming on the show, this podcast. And you were like, we've been doing Focus on the Family. And I was like, what? Because for years after I had Asher, I started listening to Dr. James Dobson. And so I was like, no way. What? That is just incredible. And I know that you and Cubby have so much to offer. So how did that ball get rolling? And where do you see that going? And then tell us more about your book.
So Cubby and I, we were just recently in Colorado doing the podcast together, like our podcast. So I have a podcast with Dr. Danny Huertas. He's the head of parenting, vice president of parenting at Focus on the Family. So we do that together, he and I. But Cubby and I were out there as well doing the morning broadcast with Focus and their president, Jim Daly, and then doing a lot of other media with Focus on the Family. So I'm out in Colorado. I have been once a month doing 5 podcasts a day or whatever, and it's so life-giving, Hannah. I mean, I love it because we're interviewing all these parenting experts. Like my co-host Danny is an expert. Literally, he's got his doctorate in it, and is a counselor and all of that. So I'm learning from him. But then we're speaking to all these parenting experts all around the country of like what they've studied, what they've written about in their books, and just getting these tips that I'm like taking directly to my family life and playing it out. And like, okay, I'm writing that one down and I'm like tearing up on that thing because I needed that for my parenting this week, because I'm just in the middle of it. So I'm almost this like co-host that's just like going, hey, I'm like right smack in the middle of needing all this truth. Please just like what would you do here and what would you do here? And like, and then sharing little things of like little stories too,
but
from
a sounding board for the rest of us.
Yes, I'm able to ask kind of some of the questions that like I'm right in the middle of that everybody else is
preaching
too.
All the way to 4. So
yes, yep. And then Danny has two kids that are like pretty grown. One's in college, one's about to get married, so like 19 and 21. So he's in this kind of different season of life and reflecting back on a lot. So it's just been amazing. I've done that for a year, and then had another podcast too with K Love before that, where I interviewed a lot of Christian artists. So I love the podcasting medium like this because you can go so deep on so many things, and it's really profound and powerful. But then the book came about separately, really. And really, in part because of the movie, there was a producer on Unsung Hero that we'd gotten to know more deeply because Cubby was involved in helping direct Unsung. And so he was on set all the time and with this other producer. And the producer really gotten to know both of us and knew our stories. And he just said, look, you need to write a book. Like there's a book in both of your stories and your story together. And he was just saying, there's a lot of discouragement, I think, out there when it comes to faith. A lot of people are deconstructing their faith and needing kind of encouragement in that arena, or a lot of people, struggling in marriage or giving up on marriage and need to hear stories of couples that have weathered a lot of different things and are, fighting for their marriage, and family life are just kind of in it on the family life thing too. And so he's like, I would love to just encourage you guys to write that book. So that's what we did last year, while I'm like also promoting Unsung Hero and watching my story play out on the screen. So, 2024 was this year of just living in my story. And seeing a lot of full circle moments too because of that, which is beautiful.
Yeah, but that's hard.
It was hard. It was challenging, but challenging and beautiful. And the ironic thing is too, there's a song that I wrote, I think, 14 years ago or something. I think Cubby and I were either dating or engaged dating, just around the time we kind of had just met. And I wrote a song called You Make Everything Beautiful. And I think it was in large part because of the hope that I was sensing in my story of like that very possibly my dreams were coming to pass, but just in faith, just going, Lord, you make everything beautiful in your time, even the hardest things, like being single for a really long time, like I was. And so I wrote it kind of in faith. And now that song was used in Unsung Hero all these years later, a decade and a half nearly later. Wow. And then it really became a theme of last year too, that he was making a lot of these things beautiful in my story.
That it was like the springtime that finally came.
Really, really sweet. So I'm very, very thankful for all that I've seen God do just in this process of writing this book and all the full circle moments and really being able to, write out these stories of his faithfulness and his goodness.
I love that. Also, I'm totally distracted. I'm so sorry about all the children that are running around behind us.
It's wonderful. I love it. It's real life.
If you need some relatable moments, just know if you have a podcast in your house, there might be some.
See, you're so aware of it. I'm like, this is just like my normal life, and I'm not even tuned into it.
Listen,
if it was my kids, I probably would be, but not.
Will only have people over that have children because
there's all kinds of grace and understanding.
Not as a guest, but like as a podcast guest.
Yes,
I probably don't need to host you here if you're not used to a bunch of kids running around because it's going to be a lot for you. But
I love it.
I apologize. No, Gosh, there's just so many things about your story. And sometimes I tell Shay that I would like to make a list of things to ask God when I get up to heaven. But the one thing that I want one day is to get out there and go hear a well done, my good and faithful servant.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's something that I know that you're going to hear because you've done so much. And to sit here with you, know all the things that you've done, but also know that you've struggled with feeling like you have to perform or feeling like you have to earn the value or the worth. But then also knowing that you've gone through burnout, you've gone through these seasons of life that we've all gone through and just you've sat there in, like you said, you were a shell and you just kind of had to go, all right, God, like, I need you to rebuild and to tell me who I am after all of this. Because it was truly like you poured yourself out and then you needed to be reminded again. And it's like this second part now to your story and your life with your children and your marriage and your book and just a new season, a spring season. It's so beautiful.
Well, and I think the extra beautiful for me is that I think one of the things I struggled with doing music for so long was the loneliness I think I felt just in the spotlight. And I had my family around me. We were on the road together, like my brothers, a lot of them were the crew.
But it's a hard
life.
But
when you're the front person.
And it's isolating.
When you're that front person and all the eyes of these thousands of people are on you and you're young and, you feel that vulnerability and you're carrying so much. I think there was a loneliness I felt in that. And there's something so beautiful about doing this with my husband and the pairing of us, like we've got Good Morning America coming up, here really soon that we're going to be doing for this book. And just even like the delight of doing that together. Like, it's just like the joy of, sharing this platform. And I think even before we say anything, there's a beautiful imagery in just kind of husband and wife doing it together that I think our world is longing for, that kind of that unity in marriage and pictures of family life that are encouraging, not perfect, and we're definitely not trying to say anything like that. And the book is very transparent of the struggles that we went through especially in those miscarriage years and the loss of like vocation for my husband and just the grieving years, So there's a lot of vulnerability there, but I think there's something so beautiful about just God's way and what he offers to us in relationship with him, and then offers to us in relationship with each other. Yes. And I think when we can kind of show the light and the love that we can experience in God, through art, like a book, or, like just even a conversation with somebody. That's such a gift of sharing our stories and being vulnerable, but pointing to his faithfulness. I think it's such a gift to each other when we're transparent about our stories.
That's right. And I agree with you about today and the hunger for seeing marriages that work. And I don't mean that in the like, oh, it looks glamorous and successful and they're a power couple. But even in what Shay and I have shared over the last few years, and we're the same. It's just, we're pretty open book.
Yeah.
We've gone through it and we share it because we're like, God got us through it.
Yes.
And so
look how good he is.
Right. Look how good he is.
Yes.
Look at the redemption. Look at the restoration in our marriage. Look at where we are today. And it's not in a braggy kind of way, but it's in a, like, there is hope for you too kind of way.
Well, and a pointing to him. To the hope. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so even in Shay sharing some of what he has gone through as a husband, a provider, he had panic attacks. He kind of went through a health journey. He did all of this, and he shares a lot of that, especially in our first few interviews that we do. But the messages that he received from men, or the messages that I received from wives of men that had their husband listen and said it changed their lives. Just to hear another man.
Yes.
And so I not only am I commending you, but also Cubby, to hear another man that can come from that place of, I was struggling, because, you know, we think of men and pride kind of hand in hand. But the more vulnerable we are able to be with our testimonies, the more God can use it.
Oh, yeah.
That's the partnership.
Yes.
And so I agree. I think there's a hunger. I think there's a need. I think that the family unit is more under attack today, the nuclear family, than it's ever been, probably in the history. Or maybe we're just seeing it more. I don't know. But for families to put themselves out there, and there have even been conversations Shay and I have had together on the podcast where I'll look at him after and I'll be like, maybe we should cut that out, because I just feel like that opens up doors to XYZ, you know, to people saying whatever. And so then I'm like, well, do I want to be fully transparent? And do I want to give someone that hope? Or do I want to guard that just in case someone has something nasty to say and like it hurts me?
Right.
But that's where we go to God and we're like, all right, you know, this is the story. And you wrote the story of our lives.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, we know it's not about man and man's opinion of us, right?
Yes.
It's about the one that made us and the one who's redeemed us and given us this story to live out.
Yep.
So.
And I'm really proud of my husband. You know, I mean, he was in this huge band, Foster People. And I mean, he early in our marriage, like we were just traveling the world. And I mean, it was, you know, what people kind of hold up. And I mean, you know, people look at your life and go, oh, it's so glamorous. What people don't know is that there's also a lot to that, like that is challenging to navigate, you know, of that very public life. But I'm really proud of Cubby because he shared parts of his story that he hasn't ever shared before that are very vulnerable. And I mean, parts that I was like, as a wife, I mean, I felt protective of him. Like, do you want to share that? Similar to what you're talking about you and Shay. And I'm so proud of you guys sharing so vulnerably, because you are putting your heart out there and it does feel challenging in some ways. But I'm so proud of him for that, because I think it's kind of causing this like redemption in his own story for other people to be ministered to through bringing these parts of his story to the light and saying, God, you know, do what you want with this part of my story, because I want it to be a blessing to others. Right. Like, do what only you can do through this part of my story, and I'm just opening my heart to you. And I'm so proud of the courage that takes. And so we're excited to see how God will use this book and that vulnerability to just bless others.
I love that. Well, I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to.
It's all good. I know how busy you are, girl.
I'm about to have some late nights, so I will crack open a good book. It comes out in February?
Yeah, February 4th.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's an audiobook version of it too, which I think is helpful for a lot of people.
Do you narrate?
Oh, we do narrate it.
Do?
It was us, and it was wild, Hannah, because even when we're narrating it, even when we were editing it, we were just going, you know what? We want to edit this with an eye to narrating it. We want every word to just be so true.
Voice.
Yes, be our voice. And then when we were both reading it down like separately, because we kind of go back and forth between the two of our stories, both of us lost it crying at one point. Like had to stop, like had to pause, pull ourselves together, and then like start reading again. So it's that vulnerable in certain parts. And I'm really thankful because again, I think people hear that vulnerability, whether they're reading it or whether they're listening to it. It's this kind of place of humanness that all of us just kind of long for. Like we want story, we want to hear another human being real. Like some of the most powerful performances I've ever heard in music are the ones that are just so passionately real. You're like, I hear that human story in there, and I'm so drawn to it and so inspired by it. And so, there's that. Like there's that sense of like we're really showing up in the story.
Wow. I love that. I love that you're narrating, and it will be your voice.
Thanks.
You can put the inflection on your life.
Yes.
And
stand by it because it's our voice with our story. Yeah.
Narrating your life. Wow.
Yeah.
What a gift. What a gift to your kids too. Do you ever think about that?
I do think about that one day they'll read it or listen to it, and just how wild that is. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love your whole story.
Thank you.
Someone out there is going to need something that you have said today.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. I've loved it.
Are there any last words of advice or wisdom or just encouragement that you would give to women or even to men or to married couples? Or I mean, I know that you touched on a singleness season. I feel like I actually get asked that a lot. Yeah. That would be something that you could.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, just a quick, speaking to that, I was living in LA and it was pre-meeting Cubby. And I remember just kind of walking near the beach one day and just wrestling through this whole sense of maybe this dream won't come true. What would I do if it doesn't? This is the main dream of my life and my heart. And I remember just coming to this place of, Lord, even if it doesn't, you are still good and you will still meet me in that pain. And so I just probably encourage, people that are listening right now to know that there can be that kind of hope in a season of waiting. And it might not be waiting for a spouse. It might be waiting for a job change or a child or some kind of big life transition in your life that area just feels really vulnerable. But I suppose my encouragement would be, when you ask that question of what would be a final thing that you could just offer to people is just hope in God, just trust in His goodness, even when life hurts, because I've just seen or life doesn't make sense. There's just times in your life where you're just like, oh my goodness, how can this part be redeemed or this part be restored? Or I just can't see any good coming from this. And we felt like that at certain points, don't know how God's going to turn this one around. And then He does. And so I suppose that would be kind of my parting thought is whatever is the greatest grief or pain or hurt or lack in your life, trust God in that. And I know that sounds very kind of simplistic, but just come to Him like this child that's just looking to a good Father that only wants the best for you. I just think of Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. And I've just seen that in my life over and over again, that He's given a hope and a future, even in times where I wondered how He would, but then He does.
Yes.
But God.
But God.
Yeah.
And your book is full of it, and the movie was full of it, and your life is full of it. And your testimony is just one for the ages.
Thank you, friend.
I think that back when you were 12 years old and you were looking at all those people that God already had in mind that you were going to be one of those world changers.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Got goosebumps.
I love it. He's smiling down. He's like,
thank you.
You did it.
I feel
you did
that.
it. And so I just love you, friend. And
Love
I'm
you
so glad
too.
that you came on and that
Me
you made time.
too. Thank you for
And
making
we got
time.
to sit down and have a semi-quiet conversation.
It's beautiful.
But
Love how real it is.
I know that you have blessed so many people that are listening
Pray
today.
so.
Thank you.
Thank
and I
you.
love you. And
Love
we'll have to have you on again.
That'd be great.
I won't because I'm not very good with technology. I will have your book link put in the bottom of this
Sounds
episode when it's out.
Sounds great.
Tell everyone where they can find you, how you want them to find you or
Yeah.
not.
Facebook and
you're
Instagram.
Spotify.
Rebecca St. James. Yeah. Apple
Um,
Music, whatever you listen to.
That's right. All the things. What's your podcast called?
It is called Practice Makes Parent.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to tune in. I'm a little ashamed that I haven't.
That's
if it's
totally
a focus
fine.
on the family.
Girl, I know how busy your life is. I really do.
4 babies. So here we go.
Here we go.
I'll be focusing on that family.
You'll be focusing on your family. You'll be living it.
Yes.
And you are already.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. All right.
Love you.
Well, love you. And I love you guys. I hope you have a great week. Thank you so much for listening today. If this episode has encouraged you, please feel free to share the show with your family and friends. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world today, and my hope is that this show is a candle in the dark.